Welcome back, everybody. It's 4 o'clock Eastern time. Probably sounds like happy hour time somewhere. We're happy because this is the last presentation for the National Wilderness Workshop for this year. We're really looking forward to our speaker, Erskine Leutze. And to help kick this session off, Andrew Downs, the board chair for the National Wilderness Stewardship Alliance, is going to introduce Jay. So Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. And what a great privilege it is to introduce Jay specifically to a workshop focused on advocacy. I've known Jay for a pretty long time now, and have really appreciated him as a mentor and somebody who provides guidance, also as a friend. And a friend of the AT, a friend of wilderness, and really a friend of some of the special places that we both cherish. So I'm so excited to introduce him here to the workshop. Jay was trained as an attorney and has become a leading voice in state federal conservation funding for investment in public lands. He's the senior advisor for Asheville NC's Southern Appalachian Highland Conservancy, an organization that has deep connection with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and one of the nation's most established land trusts. He served as chair of the Land Protection Committee and directs their government relations program. He's been the president of the board, and he's the author of an outstanding book, one of my favorite conservation stories out there, called Stand Up That Mountain, the battle to save one small community in the wilderness along the Appalachian Trail. In the tradition of a civil action, this Stand Up That Mountain's a really compelling true story of a North Carolina outdoorsman, that being Jay, who teams up with his Appalachian neighbors to save a treasured landscape from being destroyed. And I'm thinking that's the landscape that you see today, right there on the screen, the beautiful Roan Massif on the AT in Tennessee. He's the national spokesman for the Land and Water Conservation Fund Coalition and has testified before Congress on the need for increased funding for public land conservation. He's frequently asked to be a guest lecturer on conservation as well. And since the publication of Stand Up That Mountain, he's lectured at universities, taught courses in literature, environmental studies, environmental law, and public policy. He recently appeared at the National Press Club in DC. And in 2012, he was awarded with North Carolina's highest civilian honor, the Order of the Longleaf Pine, for his contributions to the conservation of land and water in his home state. He was the winner of the 2013 North Carolina Governor's Conservation Communicator of the Year Award and was named Outstanding Conservation Advocate by the Roosevelt Ash Society. Since 2007, he's been on the team leading the effort to pass and implement the Great American Outdoors Act, which we spoke about earlier in the workshop. And in 2020, Leutze was invited to the White House for a GAOA signing ceremony. Jay, it's a great honor to introduce you. I'm so appreciative to have you today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thanks, Andrew. I think it goes without saying that in addition to being a friend and a colleague, like a lot of people on this call, we also have a lot of fun. We've been together at a lot of meetings over the years, and Andrew's got the great sense of let's get outside, let's have as much fun as we can, let's get serious work done, and let's drink a beer. And here we are at the end of a week, which I know has been busy for this group in particular, and appreciate those of you that are with us this afternoon. And I'm fired up to dive in. I like to start all talks on advocacy, talking about how advocacy is very personal and advocacy is very local, and how all advocates come from a particular place, and your place creates your stories, and your story is your superpower. And when I started working in Washington, I was asked to kind of move from a volunteer role into more of a career role, because the DC team with the Land and Water Conservation Fund Coalition said, we need more real people with real stories. We don't right now need any more sharp DC lobbyists. We've got to have more stories that are fresh from the field. So today I'll start by saying, this is where I come from. This is, in conservation, we talk a lot about protecting our own backyard, and it's often as a defense to the charge of being NIMBYs. Not in my backyard. I want electric lights, but I don't want a coal mine in my backyard. Well, this is my backyard. This is a preserve that's owned by the Nature Conservancy. My parents helped protect it in 1974. It's owned by the Nature Conservancy and managed by my land trust, Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, in partnership with TNC. And then off there in the distance, this is a landscape that I'm going to show you in multiple different ways during our talk. I'm going to show you a lot of maps that sort of go from this point down to the south. And if you see what's illuminated down there in the sunshine, that's land within Pisgah National Forest proclamation boundary that is owned by a private individual, which is the case of about 50% of the land owned within Pisgah National Forest and Cherokee National Forest and Nantahala National Forest. And this is really what's driven me into conservation, this problem that we have in our public land units of them being unfinished. And so you can see that as a real problem, or you can see it as an opportunity to get cracking. And I think that's what we're all here to do, is to get cracking. This is more of my backyard. It's not as close as the first slide, but this is where I grew up playing. And this is in Pisgah National Forest. You own it. This is on public land. And so we own it together, and it's incumbent upon us to take care of it. And you can see why. This is a piece of land that is owned by the state of North Carolina. My land trust purchased it in 2011 from a woman who did not know that this waterfall was on her 260 acres. This is 6 miles from my house. It is inside the proclamation boundary of Pisgah National Forest, but because there are so few federal dollars available for additions to our national forest system, this is now owned by the state of North Carolina. So land owned by a state, but inside a national forest proclamation boundary. This highlights one of the problems we encounter when we try to make these units, whether they're within BLM or they're in the Park Service system or they're in the Forest Service system or a wildlife refuge system, this fragmentation of ownership. Luckily, this is publicly owned, but it's not owned by Pisgah National Forest. Still, I go back to this place over and over again. It inspires me that 6 miles from my own home, I'm still discovering places for the first time where you can walk and you feel like Hernan de Soto. You have this real sense of discovery. And these are my nephews who go camping with me every summer, having a great time here at what's called Cutler Falls. Conservation in my landscape in the Highlands of Rhone really started in the 1950s when garden clubs across the country joined forces to purchase the largest natural rhododendron garden on earth. There's 600 blooming acres of Catawba rhododendron high on Roan Mountain, and often the view there, that's Mount Mitchell, the highest mountain in the eastern United States. This is a very scenic landscape, but it's also a landscape with remarkable biodiversity, both plants and animals. And the conservation movement in the Rhone Highlands was really born here in the 1950s with this acquisition. It's now owned by the Forest Service. And success stories like this really gave birth to the Appalachian Trail Conservancy movement to work with us to create a land trust with a specific goal of protecting the Highlands of Rhone landscape. About 40 miles from my house, this is Rocky Fork. This main stem stream is the centerpiece of a 10,000 acre sort of battlefield over conservation, if you will. For 20 years, this contract had been under contract to multiple timber investment companies and private individuals. Funds were actually set aside through LWCF in the early 2000s by Senator Lamar Alexander, but conservation organizations were unable to get it under contract. This is a 10,000 acre inholding in Cherokee National Forest that joins the North Carolina border and Pisgah National Forest. So this is an amazing conservation hotspot, and there's fantastic salamander biodiversity on this property, great aquatic habitat, amazing recreational opportunities. 1.2 miles of the Appalachian Trail was located on this property, which is about 20% of what ATC considered left to acquire to have all of the Appalachian Trail on public land instead of crossing private land with handshake agreements. So in terms of outdoor recreation and filling in a hole in a critical wildlife corridor, everything we think about as modern conservationists, storing a lot of carbon, this is a critical property. And we jumped off a $40 million cliff with the Conservation Fund to take this property down in hopes that the Congress would then step forward and do their duty and appropriate the funds to pay off the loan to itself that the Conservation Fund took. So SHC was the group on the ground. Appalachian Trail Conservancy added their weight into the shoulder as we all hit the hill together to push for the $34 million in appropriations that it took to make this land public. And we raised $6 million privately between the Conservation Fund, ATC, and Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how this happens and what it looks like. This was a phased project. It's almost impossible to, anybody that's worked at the federal level knows that you can't get $40 million or even $34 million out of the federal government in one appropriation cycle. So we actually showed up on Capitol Hill for 7 appropriation cycles. We took the money that had been dedicated in the early 2000s, and this is starting in 2007. This effort this is in 2007, we got it under contract. So, and then there were multiple appropriation cycles, and part of the land ended up being owned by the state of Tennessee, creating their 51st state park. And you can see down there in the lower left-hand corner, the Appalachian Trail route. It went out onto this private land to a spectacular overlook, but it was not owned by the people. It was not owned by the people of the United States. It was owned by a timber investment company in Atlanta until we were able to take that phase out. So this is what LWCF does on the ground, the nuts and bolts of getting money into the ground, into a project that has great leverage with $6 million of private funding. And the state of Tennessee had committed dollars for the state park portion. So you ended up with 10,000 acres of protected land. This was the #1 ranked project for the Forest Service for multiple appropriation cycles. And even so, we could only get chunks of the total per year. That sort of shows you how broken the Land and Water Conservation Fund had been since its creation in 1964 and its $900 million funding level set in 1978. It had only been fully funded once since its founding. And some administrations asked for all $900 million in an appropriation cycle or in an interior appropriations bill, and some administrations asked for 0. And I won't detail who made it a habit to ask for the 900 million and who made it a habit to ask for zeroing out the program. But we had an uphill battle to fix a broken mechanism that let the Congress take money out of this fund every year and spend it elsewhere. And when members of the Senate, we would explain that and they would say, wait a minute, that sounds crazy. Where does the money go? We had to confront the reality that it was untraceable. I told appropriators who should know where the money goes that we don't know where the money goes. So it's very hard to fix the problem, not knowing exactly where it resided, but fixing the problem became the goal of the, it landed in the Dingell Act, where permanent authorization was attained, and then in the Great American Outdoors Act, where full funding was achieved. I'll talk more about that later. Remember this man. There's no way Rocky Fork would be protected now and that Appalachian Trail section would be on public land if it weren't for this guy. This is Curtis Swagger, and he was the staffer on Senator Lamar Alexander's staff for the second half of the Rocky Fork battle. So I got to know Curtis during that and learned a lot about how Senator Alexander was a champion for public land within Tennessee in ways that benefited landscapes far beyond Tennessee and the Southern Appalachian landscape. You know, his efforts really paid off nationally because of his own understanding of what public land brought to his home state and his local region, his backyard that he loves as much as I love my backyard and as much as you love yours. So Curtis was the conduit, and we had a great working relationship with him and with his predecessor, Lindsay Garcia. And the message here is get to know the staff of your key members. You may turn up with a gem, as we did in this case. And if everything goes great, you may have a signing ceremony, you may have an unveiling. This is the executive director of my organization, Carl, on the left, and that's Senator Alexander and Congressman Phil Rowe and me on the right. This is at the unveiling of the sign for the Lamar Alexander Rocky Fork State Park. So very fitting tribute that the state park now bears his name, because his office really went to work through the appropriations process to make sure that Rocky Fork saw money every year until we could complete the project. Back to the Roan Highlands. I hope you can see my cursor. This area here where my cursor is where the first photo was taken. That's Big Yellow Mountain. And what you see in green here is the area where that rhododendron garden is, the 600 acres. And as I said, that inspired a lot of additional acquisition energy. And when ATC and my organization sat down in the late 60s and early 70s, we had drawn this line at the 4,000-foot contour, which is the purple line. The Appalachian Trail is the red line that goes right through this mountain landscape. And the effort was to move the Appalachian Trail to the high ridge line. It had traveled along a United States highway. It's a small highway, small Appalachian highway, but nevertheless, it's a US highway. It wasn't scenic and it wasn't safe. So the effort was to create more protected land at high elevation. And as we did that, we realized we weren't only creating a great recreation corridor, we were protecting one of the most fragile areas in the eastern United States, a place because of its high elevation. We have Arctic species persisting even though we're in the southern United States. So you have this really weird confluence of elevation and species makeup, and those plants were pushed down into the south during the last ice age when the ice sheets were about as far south as Pennsylvania, but the Arctic air traveled off those ice sheets and created Arctic conditions in the south at high elevations. And with a warming climate, the only places that still support Arctic species are these high elevation islands. So we started finding in the historic records and on the ground all these rare species in this landscape. And if you move forward from 1966, 2006, this is how much land protection we accomplished during that time. And we did it because it was incumbent upon us to do it, because it's our backyard, and because we felt we had a national and a global resource that needed protecting. So we created lots of new partnerships, and we tapped the Land and Water Conservation Fund hard during those years, and we more than tripled the amount of protected land in this landscape. What you're seeing is about 22,000 acres of land in this landscape that we added between 1966 and 2006. Now we'll leap forward again. How did we decide which acres were critical? They're all beautiful. And if you chase beautiful acres, you might miss some of the other things that are important. I'm all for beautiful acres, but like I say, everything in this landscape is lovely to look at. We looked at data. We looked at element occurrences. We looked at where the plants and animals were that are underrepresented on public lands. We looked at the proclamation boundary of our national forests, and we realized that not nearly enough of those lands were protected to function as an ecologic whole and to provide clean drinking water and to provide the recreational access. So that's really what led us to the map that we were expanding and filling in sections of. We followed the science. Gray's lily is an endemic species. You could look at this map, see where Gray's lilies grow, and if you buy all of those parcels, you will have accomplished good conservation, because you're protecting really special soils that protect these rare plants. When you're protecting where this plant grows, it's a good sort of proxy for good conservation land, good land. And people come from all over the world to see this lily. It doesn't grow other places, and it grows in profusion on these grassy balls of the Rhone Highlands. Geum radiatum is another species that we use to sort of target in a very surgical way where to make sure we're active. This plant only exists in 12 locations in the world, and 3 of these are on this mountain landscape. And one of them was unprotected until 4 years ago. And so this is one of the ways we work, and it helps us change the map. So you'll see here, I've zoomed out, and that original acquisition area was right here. The addition was out to the east. The Appalachian Trail is now very bright here. You can really see the red here. I wrote my book about a mining case. A mining company intended to open the largest open surface mine in our state right here next to this relocation of the Appalachian Trail that was put there to give you views towards this unit of Pisgah National Forest and the Blue Ridge Parkway. So it looked right over this mountain. Now there's no special, this is not within the proclamation boundary. There was no regulation for this private land, but North Carolina does have an Appalachian National Scenic Trail Protection Act that says that in counties where the trail is, you have to check certain boxes. And if you read the book, you'll see that the state engaged in either very sloppy work, or they let a mine company defraud them in their permit application. And that sort of created the basis of the book. But you can see with all these different colors, again, we have not been able to protect all the land within the proclamation boundary using federal dollars. You've got, this is where the first slide was from, my backyard area. Then my land trust is everything in yellow. We purchased that and been unable to convey it to the Forest Service, even though all these tracts are within a proclamation boundary for a forest. That waterfall that I showed you is right down here, again, on land that we bought and then transferred to the state of North Carolina. So all of this is also in the proclamation boundary. And when I showed you the first slide and I said off in the distance where the sun is shining, that's this part of the landscape here. Now, zoomed out even a little bit more, that's the area I was just drawing with my cursor. Those 44 parcels were purchased by a private individual who invented a video game. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of Fortnite, but Fortnite is apparently a very popular video game. And the creator of it, Tim Sweeney of Epic Games, loves 2 things. He loves video games and he loves conservation. And so he worked with us to acquire these 7,500 acres to the south of this main axis of the Rhone Highlands. And that plant species, the Geum radiatum, the yellow flower that I showed you, exists right here in the middle of what Tim Sweeney purchased. And on Earth Day last year, Tim announced that he is donating this property to my land trust, and we will take ownership of it in April of next year. The survey alone will take a solid year to accomplish. It's 34 miles of boundary. So we're very excited about this. As you can imagine, it's also a challenge to steward this land, this really important land with fragile, globally imperiled species on it. We have an endowment that's been created to staff this place so that we can be a good steward of it. But this land will not be added to Pisgah National Forest. That's not the donor's wish. So had the Forest Service had lots of LWCF money over the last 50 years and staff that was enabled to go out and make land deals, maybe this would have all been part of Pisgah National Forest a long time ago. But we will do our best. But it points out some of the difficulties of federal land acquisition. So I just gave a talk to a garden club in Richmond, and I like talking about the North American garden. We've got wet areas over here. We've got xeriscape over here. We've got natural boundaries on the edges of the garden, just like our own backyard. And how are we doing? How are we doing as gardeners? How are we doing as stewards of what it is we're meant to protect? And zooming out farther, how's the planet doing? And what's our role in that? And what can federal land acquisition do to move the needle on the health of the planet? I think those are questions that are before us very much right now. They're certainly before the Biden administration with the 30 by 30 initiative and the America the Beautiful initiative. The Great American Outdoors Act is meant to be one way to attain those lofty goals, but we are staring down the barrel of multiple crises, not just a climate crisis, but also a habitat and biodiversity crisis. So how does what we do as practitioners, how does it tie into the larger effort at the national level and at the global level? That's what we'll talk about a little bit right now. What's the size of the challenge? This is electric light in the United States and or in North America, I guess. And imagine being an imperiled species in a world that's this bright and this developed and this fragmented. It's not just North America, but it's largely a North American issue and a Western Europe issue. Japan is very bright at night. And again, this is just a proxy for where are people living, where is it crowded, where is it hard to be a plant population or an animal population. This is decibels. Animals also need quiet. Our species needs quiet. And as a kid growing up in the South, we used to think, oh my gosh, I would never live in the busy Northeast corridor. That it's just honking horns and a bunch of noise and racket and traffic and too many people. Will now look down here in the Southeast from Atlanta to Charlotte and High Point and Greensboro. We're starting to replicate that model in the Southeast United States, which is changing the way young people today perceive the world that they live in. This is census data. Again, that's really reflected here. The busy Northeast corridor, call that the control population, and now the Southeastern corridor. If you're a species that's trying to migrate up to the Appalachian chain, the way a lot of species are right now, you got to cross a lot of roads and pass through a lot of neighborhoods. Some big animals can do that fairly easily, but slugs have a hard time and trillium have a really hard time. So there's a lot to think about when we think about how we're treating our landscape, and a high functioning network of public lands would make all the difference as species attempt to migrate to a favorable niche where they can persist. So we need national thinking and national planning. Wilderness needs to be a part of that network as the real sort of cradle of species, and then areas with slightly less protections where we can afford it need to be knitted together in a meaningful whole. This is roads in the United States as of 1950. So again, really hard to move around in this busy Eastern Seaboard corridor, but somehow miraculously in this landscape, the Appalachian Trail makes its way from North Georgia to Maine and beyond. That's fascinating. That is inspiring to me that people had the foresight in the 1930s to design a unit that's a very skinny national park unit that knits together these special places and these public land units oftentimes. It's very inspiring that we have that, and it can be the backbone of a meaningful network, as can all of our national trail units, whether it's Continental Divide Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail. Those are useful places to look to for corridor connections. I talked a little bit about species migrating. This is what the Nature Conservancy predicts species will do in the coming decades. And my backyard happens to be a hot spot for where species need to migrate in order to persist. I was just sent an article today about armadillos showing up in Western North Carolina. Species are on the move from Texas. I saw armadillos this summer in Missouri. And that's a very obvious example of species moving to different niches to find places they can reproduce and to breed and nest. Hard going if you're a slow mover. Really hard going if you're little and wet. But it's hard for everybody if you're big and you need to move in order to find a mate or to find enough to eat. is on the edge of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So many of the things we do without fully thinking through it make it really hard for species to move around and succeed. And when you think about those night light slides, you think about the road network, there are things that are going to come out of this transportation bill, the infrastructure bill, that can have a very positive impact on wildlife corridors. And that's very exciting to me. We can do a lot better, and we have the science to support doing better. And I believe that we will, we must. So why are we having this? Why are we having this fight? Why are we having this advocacy push into the future to make sure that species can persist and succeed? Well, public land is one way of looking about how much we've protected and how much we need to protect. State land is also really important in a state like New York in particular that doesn't have a lot of federal land. But I used this slide to demonstrate the difference in our country between the West and the East. A lot of public land because of the way the states were created in the Western United States. And then in the Eastern United States, you have a history of subdivision since the 1700s that has led to all of the, typically the male heirs in a family subdividing up a large tract. And then if they have multiple heirs, it gets subdivided again. Upon sale, properties get subdivided into smaller and smaller tracts. So it gets a lot harder to knit together public land units. The West, which I think even those of us from the South treasure as a playground for hunting and fishing and connecting with cultural heritage and native populations and all that fascinating history. We feel some ownership over it. I feel some ownership over Yellowstone and Yosemite, just like I hope people in Alaska feel some ownership over Great Smoky Mountains National Park and the Blue Ridge Parkway. But we have a real challenge in the East in knitting together the public lands to make them make sense for nature. There's big blobs showing how much of a state is federally owned public land. Don't really show you at the granular level where that land is, but that busy corridor from Greensboro to Atlanta down here in the Southeast is south of all this public land here with Great Smoky Mountains National Park and Pisgah National Forest. And it's interesting to see how scattered the public land is in the Eastern United States. This is our vaunted national park system. A lot of people think this is the finest of our accomplishments, but it's actually very little land when you zoom out and look at the footprint. Our national park system is quite small. National forests, a bigger system, to be sure. And when you lay those onto the same map, you have some exponential growth of the public land protection system. That's great. Within this, obviously, some of the land is managed as wilderness, not very much in North Carolina. We'd love to see more because management is where it all comes down. Something can look protected and feel protected, and mining companies may also think it'd be a great place to remove a bunch of minerals. And it feels less protected when those uses are adopted by forest management. Our National Wildlife Refuge System, again, I would have thought it was bigger when I discovered this slide. I would have thought we had more land protected in our National Wildlife Refuge System. We can do better. National trails, we have a lot of trails. It's great. Again, they can provide a great backbone for additional land protection in a way that makes sense. They often follow courses of water, which are very rich in biodiversity, and they often adopt traditional pathways, which is great. So this is a system that bears watching for sure. Private land conservation is a major player on the landscape. These are conservation easements. As of 2015, each dot representing a donated or a purchased set of development rights. And it can be more rights than that. It can include timber rights and mineral rights. But typically with a conservation easement, what the land trust is trying to accomplish, or the entity holding the easement, is to protect that property against subdivision. Because we've seen subdivision really creates difficulties when you try to knit together ecologic units. So conservation easements have been very successful, and they don't work for every landowner, but they've been a very useful tool in the toolkit. Land and Water Conservation Fund, I mentioned a couple of times, and I know other people have talked about it. This brochure is from a few years ago because it's older than 50 years now. And but it really has a new life since the passage of the Dingle Act and the Great American Outdoors Act. So I'll talk about that a little bit. Just to familiarize those who are hearing about Land and Water Conservation Fund for the first time, the places you love were protected with the Land and Water Conservation Fund, whether it was in holdings that were purchased within a national park or a linear national park unit, or within a wildlife refuge. Land and Water Conservation Fund has been a very effective tool for the past 50 plus years. It's not just federal lands. There's also a stateside assistance grants program that creates local parks and ball fields and swimming pools and greenways. So nearly every county in the country has taken advantage of LWCF funding. And there was a great webinar yesterday from the Land and Water Conservation Fund Coalition on stateside assistance grants. So if you want to learn more about that program, go to the LWCF Coalition website and you can learn a lot more. How do you do it? When you have a broken program, you have $900 million pledged to an account and the money's not reaching its destination, it's being siphoned off. It should piss you off. And it pissed me off because I was in the middle of the Rocky Fork project and there wasn't enough money to get it done. So I was learning about the limitations as Rocky Fork had to compete with projects in Idaho and California and Arizona, all across the country. And so I started locally with my senator, one of my two senators in North Carolina, and that's Richard Burr. And I did what I think anybody on this call would do. Once I'd had a couple of meetings and ran into him in the hallways a couple of times, I asked him to go fishing. And much to my amazement, he said yes. And so that's Tom Coors in the picture there, who's the government relations director for North America for the Nature Conservancy. But he lives in North Carolina, and he and I cut our teeth together in the North Carolina legislature. And his colleague at the time, David Ray, there, and that's the senator and his wife. And we invited them to go fishing. They said yes. We said, let's have an overview of the landscape first. So we went to the spot where I took the first slide in this presentation and showed him how many things in the landscape had been protected using the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And at the end of this part of the visit, before we actually hit the stream, he said, why'd you invite me out here? Am I your favorite senator? And we said, of course you're our favorite senator, Senator. Absolutely. But we need help. He said, well, what's the status right now? How many members of Congress do you have in support of fixing this broken mechanism? And we said, well, to be frank, we have every Democrat in the House and the Senate on board. And he said, well, how many Republicans do you have in the Senate? We said, one, Lamar Alexander. He said, okay, well, why don't I call Lamar on Monday and we'll write a bill. So I make it sound easy. Invite a senator to go fishing, ask them for a major piece of legislation, have them write a bill. That's not exactly how it happened. There was a lot of cultivation that went into it. Senator Burr on that day asked if we could take his Christmas card photo. That's how you know you're having a good day out. When the senator wants to have the Christmas card picture taken with an LWCF funded project in the background. This was his staffer at the time, Matt Dockham, and Matt Dockham's fiance. We asked them to go fishing as well, because the senator may be all on board for what you're asking them to do, but it's the staff. Remember Curtis Swagger with Senator Alexander's office? It's often the staff that are going to get your work done, nuts and bolts. And so we invited the senator's staffer to go fishing when he was in the area, and he agreed, and we had a great but cold day out. This is Justin, the senator's chief of staff's son. We took him fishing. So there's a theme here. Let's get these folks outside, make them understand what it is we do, and have great stories to tell. Stories are your superpower. That's where it comes from. And so now when we walk into the office, we don't get brushed off. We have staffers getting up out of their chair saying, hey, how are you doing? Have you been fishing lately? We've really created connections with people on the staff because we saw Senator Burr as the center of this effort. Senator Burr said that getting the LWCF program fixed was probably going to require a rifle shot at midnight, which is how what he was saying was he thought that we weren't big enough to be a standalone bill. We were going to have to be attached to something else. And that often happens in the middle of the night when a train is leaving the station and everybody throws their luggage on board. In this case, throws their bill into the package. And so that's where we thought our future lay. We invited Senator Burr hiking again, and this time we also invited the Secretary of the Interior because we wanted everyone to appreciate that this is a bipartisan effort. So Secretary Jewell and the Obama administration, Senator Burr, a conservative Republican, went hiking together on the Appalachian Trail in the Highlands of Rhone. And after this visit, they started having breakfast together and plotting how to pull off the rifle shot at midnight. This is how it works when it's working. When I say work, this is the work part. This is what the coalition, and this comes from the Nature Conservancy's effort, just their internal processing of the actions that they took, and when they would send action alerts to their membership. And this requires a lot of meetings. It's not just 3 fishing trips. It requires a lot of meetings. It requires a lot of touches. It requires a lot of press. It requires field days. It requires op-eds. So keep track of the work you're doing. At the end of any effort you endeavor in, it might really make an interesting story at the end of it. The ingredients, you can see them there. No surprise. Everybody here is an adept advocate. I know that. As you build a coalition, you use all your relationships, and then you hope you get lucky. The Dingle Act was the largest public lands bill in 10 years. It added a lot of wilderness. This was a train leaving the station, and in this case, LWCF fixing the authorization problem, making this program so that it wouldn't expire every 3 to 5 years. It became the train that was leaving the station that everybody wanted to get on. We went from being a redheaded stepchild to being the main train that everybody wanted to hop aboard. And so a lot of great conservation got done, and LWCF was one of the workhorses. This is what it looks like when it's bipartisan. When you've built all those networks, you may end up with Senator Murkowski and the co-chair of the Senate Energy, the ranking member, Maria Cantwell, the Democrat, appearing together with the roll call. That was very inspiring to us because they're not always on the same page, but this was a true bipartisan slam dunk. So remember that guy, Curtis Swagger. This is Curtis Swagger sitting with us at a table with his new boss, Cory Gardner, at the head of the table. Curtis moved, he left Senator Alexander's office to work in Senator Gardner's office. And we saw an opportunity to build a bridge there with Curtis, who understood well the benefits of LWCF. And if LWCF's been powerful in Tennessee, it's really been powerful in Colorado. In addition, Senator Gardner was involved in a heated Senate race at this point and really wanted this issue because he'd worked on it when he was a member of the House, and now he saw a benefit of working on it when he was in the Senate. And so we put together a breakfast with Theodore Roosevelt IV, who Theodore Roosevelt is a hero of Senator Gardner's. And when we learned that, we thought we would invite Theodore Roosevelt IV, who has been very helpful to the coalition. He's an investment banker in New York, very active in conservation circles. And so here we are. You remember from the field trip, Tom Coors was there. Here he is at the breakfast, and Curtis is sitting at the table as well. And then folks from the coalition there on the left. And this was a great breakfast. The purpose of this breakfast was to get Senator Gardner fired up for a meeting with the White House. This is an hour later at the White House. When you are a vulnerable member of Congress, you have a lot of mojo with leadership. And the leader comes to vulnerable members and says, what do you need in your race? And Senator Gardner said, I have been back home talking up the Land and Water Conservation Fund since long before Raleigh moved from Salt Lake City to Denver, where he had showed up with the then Governor Hickenlooper, and Senator Bennett, the Democratic senator. And he believes in these issues, and he told Mitch McConnell, I need to fix the Land and Water Conservation Fund. I need this bill passed. And Mitch McConnell listened and said, all right, we'll go to the White House and we'll tell the president. In the back there, you can see Curtis Swagger again. He keeps showing up, and I draw a direct line from Rocky Fort to the White House. This is sort of the story that Curtis had to sell within the Republican caucus, and it gave Senator Gardner a story to tell as well, all the way to the White House. After that meeting, Donald Trump tweeted, I'm calling on Congress to send me a bill that fully and permanently funds LWCF and restores our national parks. And then he thanked Senator Gardner and Senator Daines, another member who was seen as vulnerable and had this on his wish list. And this was part of the plan to make LWCF a safe place for more Republicans, because this bill was not going to pass through reconciliation. It was going to need 60 votes. It was going to need 60 votes to avoid a filibuster from Senator Lee of Utah and some other members who don't love the Land and Water Conservation Fund the way you and I do. Right about that time, we came up with the coalition idea was to put two bills together, the Parks Maintenance Bill and the LWCF bill. And this is the day that we had a press conference to announce that merger of these two pieces of legislation. Senator Portman, Senator Gardner, Senator Manchin, and Sally Jewell, who had left Interior and become the head of the Nature Conservancy at this point. And so this was a beautiful marriage of two bills. We gave the maintenance folks some extra members. They gave us some extra members, and we said, let's do it together. They're related. It was inevitable that they would merge. We shouldn't compete against each other. We should build on each other's strengths. And this was the day that all came together. And there was a global pandemic. And on that day that we had that press conference, the Capitol shut down. The NBA canceled their season, and the sky really fell. So you'll all remember that, and we don't need to dwell on it, but it became a stranger lobbying challenge to engage with members in the House and the Senate to move this new mega bill, which came to be called the Great American Outdoors Act. We did it. This was the vote in the Senate. At this point, we had the president on board. We already had all the Democrats on board, and we had several Republican champions that had come along with Senator Burr and Senator Gardner. So this was a great day. Senator McConnell did not make it easy. We had a very difficult floor schedule. You have 6 procedural votes on the Senate floor. One of them was scheduled at 1 o'clock in the morning. He told Senator Gardner, you'll have your shot, but I will not make it easy, because they had a lot of other business on board and they really wanted to nominate as many judges as they could before the elections. So we threaded a needle as a coalition and as champions for the bill. We ended up at the White House. It was not in question whether the House would pass the bill once the Senate did. The House had flipped to the Democrats, and instead of Rob Bishop as chair of the Natural Resources Committee, we had Raul Grijalva, who had long been a supporter of LWCF. And so we had more of a cakewalk in the House, and here we are at the White House with the president signing the bill. Here we are at the Department of Interior, where they threw us a lavish reception to celebrate. There were some people in the administration that were not keen to see this legislation passed. There were some people who had built their careers around stopping federal land acquisition. And so I think this was the thank you that we got during a pandemic. Yeah, you passed the bill, you got the president to sign it, you can have a Chick-fil-A sandwich now. So it was incredibly stressful, incredibly exciting. It was about a 12-year battle in my life. Working through these weeds, and when I get stressed out, I go back to the mountain because that's where I get my strength from. And I know everybody on this call, you've got your places that you go to get your strength. And but I also want to invite you to my place. Come to the Highlands of the Rhone. Let's walk the Appalachian Trail. Let's go visit Andrew. See those blooming rhododendron, and I'll take you to Cutler Falls. You own the federal public land. You don't own Cutler Falls, the state of North Carolina does, but I can get you on it. So you're welcome anytime. So I've not been looking at the chat. If there are questions to direct to me, happy to try to answer any if we have any time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jay. So now when you guys are looking to get into North Carolina state parks, now you can say, I know a guy. But yeah, I can't thank Jay enough, not only for sharing his story today, but for all the work that he's done for this part of the world and for all of us able to rely on LWCF. So Jay, we're giving you a great round of applause. Imagine a huge room here in Roanoke, just bursting with excitement. Really appreciate your time and your perspective here. If you've got questions, please put them into the chat. And I'll just take a minute while everybody's doing that to connect this once again to a lot of the topics throughout this week and through the webinar series that preceded it. You know, when you're dealing with Congress and you're being an advocate, it's all about relationships. It's about understanding a complex process of not only inner political dynamics, right? Jay was talking about what it meant for some congressional representatives to be up for re-election, and understanding that gives people a little bit louder of a voice within their party. So understanding those dynamics, understanding how the votes are scheduled, and all of these things, Jay talked about that, is really important for advocates to have a good grasp of that, so we can be nimble. As Jay also pointed out, these bills get rolled together, they get separated. Portions of a bill get tacked onto another bill all the time. So that allows you that understanding, that commitment, and the stories you bring allow you to be nimble, but also not take no for an answer. And I think you'll recall our colleague Anders Reynolds talks a lot about that. You know, always leave the door open, and if you need techniques, talk to Anders, because he's got a great sort of backpack full of techniques to keep the door open, even when it seems like he's getting a no. He'll say something, it turns it into a maybe or a soft yes. We got a great question here from Pete. How did you keep positive through all the ups and downs of this work with LWCF? And I'll ask you to refrain from talking about how you kept positive in the battle against Putnam Mine. Everybody can read about that instead of that mountain. Don't want to spoil that one. But in the LWCF battle, how did you stay positive as things sort of became touch and go at times?
Well, there are a couple of things I think that are salvation for those of us that work in conservation. It's tough. Obviously, it's a rough world that we're facing. We're watching kids deal with anxiety as they confront stories of a world that's going to change radically before they get to be old the way some of us are. And so it can be depressing. It can be heavy work. And working on Capitol Hill can be divisive, and you encounter all of those things. But let's face it, we get to talk about the greatest stuff in the world on Capitol Hill. I always think, man, I hope I came in right after a pharmaceutical representative, because I know I'm more interesting than that. We get to talk about what people love and reconnect people to the past. And when you're sitting in an office in Capitol Hill and you can get a senator or a member of the House to talk about a trip they had as a kid touring the national parks, it's very inspiring. And it's so easy to find common ground, whether it's hiking or camping or hunting or fishing. We have such a broad array of stories that we can tell from our own personal experience. And you just can't get down when you are walking the halls of Congress, these buildings that I love, which made January 6th really difficult for a lot of us that work on the Hill. It was heartbreaking to see these national treasures trashed and diminished, because we feel a great sense of pride when we're there. And you feel the ghosts of Muir, you feel the ghosts of people who lost some battles, but got to take their stories to places where that are really special and kind of rare air. So I'm always inspired when I'm on the Hill. I'm always inspired when I'm talking to a member who gives me time, and I find that whole process ennobling. And I will say that I have had in the past 12 years one conversation with a staffer that I thought was a dud. I've had conversations where I didn't think I changed any minds, but I've only had one conversation with a hostile staffer. Usually we're dealing with earnest young people on the staff who want to make their own mark on the Hill and are excited at brushing up against something that could happen during their lifetime and could be inspiring. And obviously I'm meeting with the natural resource staff, so they're kind of wired this way. Most of the time. Sometimes you get a staffer that would rather be meeting with a pharmaceutical rep and get stuck on natural resources for 3 weeks. But anyway, it's easy to stay motivated when you go home and you see those places and you reconnect and you formulate your next story for your next trip.
Great. I've got a question here from Taylor, and I'll read it. Taylor says, I noticed on a couple of your maps that species migration appeared to be higher on the East Coast, where human development populations are also higher. Do you know if any studies have been done to prove a correlation between the two? And before turning it over to Jay, I'll just note through my work at the Appalachian Trail, a lot of times when you look at species migration, they focus on the highest elevation Appalachians because of the glaciation and some of the things that Jay has talked about earlier. But when you pan out to a certain scale, you can't really parse apart those Appalachians from the nearby cities like Charlotte, Atlanta, Roanoke, and others. So it speaks to even more important work that Jay is doing, and that a lot of partners here are doing on the call, increasing those the size of those corridors. But Jay, any ideas on the studies that you've seen maybe on a correlation between human development and migratory patterns?
So a little bit through the Appalachian Trail large landscape planning efforts, we spend a lot of time talking with scientists about resilient landscapes. And so one thing that's happening is in the Southern Appalachians, you have all these different niches that are possible because of slope, elevation, aspect, and water. We have, water coming up out of the Gulf of Mexico, creating humidity that creates storms. We have snowstorms in the Southern Appalachians born on the Great Lakes. So you have this really dynamic, complex landscape with a lot of climate resilience. And that's what that map shows a lot of. And what we're coming to find is the Appalachian Range actually is a life raft for species in a way that some landscapes are not. So I spend most of my time thinking about the East because it is my backyard and it's where my projects are based. And so I'm more familiar with why it is a resilient landscape than I am on why some other landscapes are less resilient. But that's when you go searching, you're going to be looking for climate resilience and pinch points and the Nature Conservancy. And I must say, some of the data is really strong in some parts of the country. It's really strong in the East right now. And I'm not sure that the studies are as mature in the Western landscape right now. So watch the Nature Conservancy in particular and their work on resilient landscapes to learn more.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. I really, once again, Jay, it's great to see you. I wish we were sitting down over that beer you mentioned here in Roanoke, but I'll take a rain check. How about that? Sound good?
Please.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Jay. A couple inspiring stories wrapped up in there. The mine, Rocky Fork, a place that's really special to me. I got to work to design a lot of the AT relocation on that when I was pretty young in the game. So that was a real pleasure. And then Great American Outdoors Act. So a ton of really inspiring stories there about what it looks like when you apply some of these tools and techniques and can be successful in advocacy. So Jay, once again, appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you.
All right. And no problem. And we'll turn it over to Randy.
All right. Thanks again, Jay. And thanks everybody please stay with us. We've got a few more things and the finish line approaches. We'll be doing a quick wrap up here. So this has been a wonderful week. We've spent our time trying to advocate for wilderness stewardship, trying to help build some skills, giving you many stewardship examples, those examples that are in action, giving you stories that you can learn from and build upon in your own areas, giving you some practical advice, everything that you can take from here and go forward into your own area and continue to work on your advocacy. We've tried to provide examples of how you can be more diverse and inclusive in your efforts, how to reach out to a broader audience. We've brought the latest science on some of the scientific issues, some of the technology issues to the forefront. Again, we've been trying to provide those practical tools for you. And we all know this is why we do it. Stewardship is the important entry area to people getting caring about the land and moving forward. And I think it's so critically important for us as land managers and stewards to think about that and to apply it into our daily lives. So action like this doesn't happen without a lot of people helping. So I just wanted to put up the slide here. People who have been involved in the planning of the workshop, who have been presenters in some cases, and have helped add roles as moderators or behind the scenes as co-hosts this week. My thanks to all of you for your participation over the last 9-10 months to help bring this workshop to conclusion and success. And I just so much appreciate all of your efforts and involvement in the National Wilderness Workshop and NWSA. And I have to give a special thank you to Andrew Downs here. Andrew has been our board chair for the last 5 years. And unfortunately, he's terming off because of the way we're structured. You're allowed 3 consecutive 2-year terms on the NWSA board, and he is now termed off because he's been on the board since 2015. So Andrew, I can't be there in person, but I will be sending you this plaque if I can somehow show it. You can see it on the screen. It's not really, there we go. Maybe if I put it in front of my face, it'll pop up.
Thank you guys so much, Randy. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor. I really appreciate the recognition.
Well, thank you, Andrew. You've been a steadfast supporter for NWSA. You've been a great leader as we've been working through things. And we're going to wish you the best as you continue your career with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. And thank you so much for your time and your service to NWSA. So what's next as we move forward here? So the recordings and the materials will be available soon. I'm hoping to get them out later today or certainly over the weekend. So by Monday for sure, be looking for those. I think they'll act as an archive that people can refer back to. You can share them with your coworkers, your friends, other people in your organization. And we've got a number of other materials that have been mentioned in the chats or that the authors have provided or the presenters have provided. We'll have all that available for you to reference on the NWSA website. And you know, there were a number of sessions that were not able to be recorded or were not able to be brought to the National Workshop because we decided not to try to have concurrent sessions. That was an early decision. We wanted to make sure we could all be together and hear everything all at once instead of sending people off in different directions for the workshop. So because of that, we've captured some of the presentations that weren't able to present here, and we'll bring them to you as future webinars over the course of the next year. The first one up, of course, is going to be a recap and feedback session about the National Wilderness Skills Institute that was held last spring. It was a virtual training experience to train up wilderness rangers, staff, getting prepared for the 2021 field season. And so there's been a lot of discussion about what that should look like in the future. And we have a panel assembled that will talk about that and come back and see us in December for that particular session. The links for registering for that will go up in the next day or so, and that'll be in mid-December. And just like with the webinars, there'll be future coffee hours that will also bring people and topics to have a chance for open mic, networking, and future discussions. I think people said they really liked the coffee hours, a chance to interact better. This week, we're planning to schedule more of those as the next year comes forward. I think Katie Armstrong from the Forest Service, after she gets her feet on the ground a little more, has agreed to come back and participate in one of those open conversations. So we look forward to having her and others that you would want to interact with be a part of those conversations. And then finally, the 2022 National Wilderness Workshop will be coming up in 8 or 10 or 11 or 12 short months from now. And so Heather, I'm going to turn the time over to you to talk about what's happening there. Where did you go, Heather? Let's see, oh, she got kicked out somehow. All right. You're coming in, Heather, just hang on.
Before she gets on, I'll have to give kudos to Heather. I saw her in Roanoke 2 nights ago. So even though we went virtual, she came and visited our lovely city, and appreciate that so much. There she is.
Hello. Thank you for bringing me in. I appreciate it. That was awesome seeing Andrew. You know, I wasn't able to get a refund for my Airbnb coming for the workshop, and I had set up meetings in DC. So I thought, well, I'll do it anyway. So I've missed seeing everyone here in person, but hopefully for the 2022 workshop. So as Randy said, there's a lot that's being planned for the future. You know, one of the things that SWS is working on right now is finding ways really to marry communities to their wilderness areas. It's a theme that we have heard throughout this week from people who have been successful advocates for wilderness, is that it's the community around a wilderness that really advocates for it. And so we have launched a new program called Wild Town, and I encourage you to go to our website and read all about it. We would love to bring you in on that. And we're hoping to leverage a lot of what we've also talked about this week with the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better bill, to create that and bring it to more communities so that we can help with that ecosystem connectivity and ultimately wilderness health. So that's something that we're working on as an organization. We will also be working on standing up planning committees for the National Wilderness Workshop in 2022, and then also for the 60th anniversary with NWSA and other partners in 2024. And the workshop in 2022, we are looking to co-develop the workshop with tribes and bring the workshop, place it on tribal land. So those conversations are happening right now as far as how co-development will work and where it can be located. The theme that we would be looking at is co-management of wilderness lands between tribes and agencies, and the whole spectrum of options within that. So we definitely need help if anyone wants to be on the planning committee. Being on the planning committee definitely is a chunk of time. Usually we start meeting bi-weekly. In February, we meet bi-weekly up until June, where we start meeting weekly. And then there's also some additional kind of committee work beyond that. So it's definitely a commitment. But I think if you're someone who would excel at that and would like to do that, then it might be worth your time. We'd really love to have you. We also had a great conversation just yesterday about the 60th anniversary of the Wilderness Act and how we want to really celebrate that in 2024, what kinds of events leading up to a big event, what kinds of priorities and things we can build in the community to really raise the relevancy and awareness of wilderness across the country. So we will also be looking for a committee of people who want to work on that. We've already gotten a couple of emails, and we would welcome yours too. As soon as I hand it back to Randy, I'll put my email in the chat as well as the website, and hope to hear from any of you who want to be engaged. So thanks, Randy, back to you.
All right, thank you, Heather. Well, I think we have reached the point in our agenda where we are done. So my responsibility for the National Wilderness Workshop is over. We want to thank you very much for your participation this week. I think hopefully you've left with some new tools, some new friends, and a new energy for wilderness stewardship in your hometown. So thank you everybody for being here. Thank you all the workers. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you everybody else. I could go on and on for a while, but I think I'm going to